Hey, Gumshoes. Welcome to another A Murderer's Heart Live. You know what? I forgot to check on why I have this circle in the middle, but here we are. Anyway, I'm just going to wait for a confirmation of sound and then go ahead and get started. For a confirmation of sound and then go ahead. Okay, I have my confirmation. Okay, so as always, we're going to follow a live Q&A format. I think we have one question from the last live. Hopefully, I think my mouse is running low on battery. Anyway, okay. One thing I will mention. I was reading the chat. I think it was the chat afterwards. So it's either a chat or someone's comment. And someone made a really good point. So I thought I would point it out. So I was talking about the leap of logic with Colby saying, like you weren't there, meaning you weren't there at the wedding, so you couldn't possibly know that Tylee wasn't at the wedding. And I addressed just what a strange logic that was, because as I said last week, like, we know about the fires in California, where most of us are not in California, so but oh, just a second. I just got a notification that my screen is black. So let me see what's going on here. Okay. Let me try removing my screen. I am added to the stage. So can someone let me know if, yeah, I see that, Cindy. I'm just wondering if I still have no picture. If I don't, then I don't know what we'll do. Okay. Do I have picture yet? Because on my end, it shows that I do. And the chat is not updating. Let me see. Okay. No picture still. Then, all right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to self and then add myself to the stage again, and hopefully that will do it. If not, this will be a really quick live. Can you guys see me? Yeah, because everything is showing as normal for me. Yeah, thanks, Hans. Yeah, if this doesn't work, no, okay. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't look any different. Hmm. Okay. I'll see if I can leave and come back in. Okay. We will see if this works. If this doesn't work, then we'll probably just stop the live. Oh, okay. So someone says she sees me. Okay, great. All right. Yeah, I don't know what that was because my settings didn't change. I just left and came back in. So it's like the equivalent of unplugging your computer and plugging it back in. Okay. All right. Oh, so the one thing I was going to say about that, which someone pointed out, I think in the chat, I don't know if you could still hear me. So you can see me now, but I don't know if you could hear me before. I'll just start over. So, so in the last Q&A, I was talking about how unusual Colby's logic was, like by saying, in regard to the wedding, were you there? If you weren't there, you don't know. And so, so I was pointing out, like, that's really strange, like kind of elementary logic, almost like a kid covering their face and thinking you can't see them. And but then someone pointed out in the live that he echoed what Lori said to him in reference to like the kids being murdered. She was asking him, "Were you there? If you weren't there, so you don't know." So it gave me just more compassion for Colby. Rome wasn't built in a day or rebuilt in a day in this regard. So he comes by that logic, honestly. Okay. Let's see. So there was a question from the last live. I think I might have answered it, but not in the live, but in a comment. But I'll just address it. Do you think Tylee was held captive, so to speak, in the days or the 1 week leading up to her murder because she could tell the truth about what she knew about Charles or maybe even Joe or other things? And what I mean by captive is confined to her room or the apartment without any outside contact via phone, computer, or contact with a visitor who thinks she could trust or that Lori was concerned Tylee would speak out to. I've actually wondered this same thing myself, because with Lori cutting off all of her resources that last week, I mean, her last brick and mortar purchase, Tylee's last brick and mortar purchase was, I think, in Utah when they were on their way to Idaho. So I thought that was significant. It just meant like in that week that she was in Idaho, Lori had taken control of her money, and we know that she still had a credit card because Colby used the Tylee's credit card to buy a lightsaber. And I thought it was also interesting that the guy who reported that in the trial, he said that Colby used it to buy himself a birthday present. And I think he was shielding Colby from scrutiny because that purchase was in October, but his birthday is in April. So it wasn't a birthday present. It wasn't even like a Christmas present. I think he just bought himself a lightsaber. So he was able to use that credit card. It was like a PayPal account tied to her credit card. So he said credit card, it may have been a debit card. But it does seem that in Tylee's last week, she was pretty cut off. And at one point there was a video of Tylee and JJ like washing plushie toys in, it was like rainwater. So they were just like sitting outside in the grass, I think, or maybe on a sidewalk or something in front of Lori's apartment, she and JJ. washing these toys. And so I don't know if they were like playing, but that's not something she would have done, in Arizona. So yeah, so I think at least to some degree, she really was pretty much captive. Like I haven't heard of anyone talking with Tylee after her trip to Idaho. So it was interesting that by interesting, heart-wrenching, that when Tylee was driving from Arizona to Idaho, now keep in mind, she was 16. She wasn't even 17 yet. And she was driving on interstates and by herself. So, Lori, Alex, like no one, it looks like no one from the family even offered to drive up with her. But one of her friends, who actually testified in Chad's trial, had said that Tylee called her when she was on her way up to Idaho because she didn't want to be by herself. But there's no reference to anyone talking with Tylee that last week. So, and I knew even when I was there in Arizona, I knew that Lori monitored Tylee's phone because she told me she did. But yeah, so I imagine at minimum, Tylee knew she was being very closely monitored. Okay. All right, let me see if there are any other questions. Oh, and if you have a question, it helps to just put a question in all caps or use an emoji. Don't put the whole question in all caps. It does make it a little more difficult to read, but just put the word question in all caps. Okay, Anastasia asks, okay, I am curious as to why Lori and or Tylee would send Colby money all the time. If there was any issues on, if there was any lives on this issue, I apologize. I don't think I ever heard about it really. So if you Google my name and timeline, like case, timeline, I have a pretty extensive timeline that hits on all of the dates that money was sent from both Lori and Tylee's Venmo accounts. We do know from someone who testified that once Tylee was dead, Lori was no longer sending Colby Venmos from her account, and she had 2 Venmo accounts. So that whole thing that he said about, how his mom was using Venmo, or was using Tylee's Venmo because she wasn't tech savvy. She was tech savvy enough to manage 2 Venmo accounts, and you can't have 2 Venmo accounts on a single phone because it's actually tied to your device ID. So she had one Venmo account on one phone, and then she had another Venmo account on another phone. So we know, I've talked about this before, but all of Tylee's money went to Colby once she was dead, because though they didn't give us the breakdown of each transfer once Tylee was dead, they did give us a total, like a sum total between September and December, and it totaled a little bit more than what Tylee would have received from Social Security between September and December, meaning she had some money in her account before Lori started sending it to Colby. I think that's the most logical explanation, because Tylee wasn't earning any income. But then we know that Lori was sending Colby money from a Cash App account. I think she might have had 2 Cash App accounts. I suspect that that was more than the Venmos. But yeah, and so we don't know, if she also did like in-bank transfers. Understandably, the state wanted to protect Colby and all of their witnesses as much as possible so that they wouldn't be, just eviscerated on cross. But I do suspect if Lori is still angry at Colby, if she's angry and if she maintains this anger and pulls away this protection, she may decide to disclose more of these details. So I don't really know why. I think Lori just knew that was the best way to keep Colby and Kelsey silent, because Colby did say toward the end of September, he insisted on talking to Tylee that night. And he later said to Keith Morrison that he told her, all I need is 10 seconds. And when you say something like that, because I've done something like that where I really just wanted to verify that a person I was concerned about was alive. When you say something like, all I need is 10 seconds, you clearly want to verify if this person is alive, which means you're concerned that something has happened to this person. But, obviously Tylee didn't call him, but it was right after that the money, the transfers just started. It was just like hand over fist. Some weeks had as many as I think 3 transfers. Plus the week that Tammy was murdered, they were in Disneyland. So I think both Lori and Chad were spending a lot of the money that he got from Tammy's life insurance just on keeping their kids silent. But yeah, when I was there in 2018, Colby worked part-time. He worked at a gym. He was a personal trainer. And Lori and I had gone in there and worked out with him one time. But I know when he asked for money the day after the welfare check, he said like he was going to get another job and stuff. So I don't know that he ever did that. Yeah, and I know I'm in a circle. I don't know why that is. I was doing a video for analytics, and I had it in a circle, like just as a small part of the screen, and now I can't get it out of this mode. Miss Wee Lassie, that's cute, asked, have you had any updates on Joe, if the police are doing or going to do any more work on his case? They never did any work on his case because they made researching his case or investigating his death contingent on the autopsy, and the autopsy came back natural causes, but this was based on an external examination. And I've mentioned this before, but when I was on the Nancy Grace podcast, there was a medical examiner on that show, and we were all talking before the show started, and he was very surprised to find out that the ME only did an external examination, and he said if they didn't open him up, at most, they should have ruled the cause of death as unknown. They should not have ruled it as natural causes. So who knows if this is a case of, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, but yeah, so they they never did an investigation. And then they said later and that they were, I forget the wording that they used, but they didn't open an investigation. They did, a review. So a review most likely meant they pulled out the file, flipped through it, put it right back in the filing cabinet. Because the detective I talked with, he had inherited the case, so or Joe's file, so he wasn't even familiar with the case at all. But yeah, so I think Phoenix police, they've come under a lot of scrutiny in the past few years, and I think they're just like, we want nothing to do with this horrid case. Let's see. Hey Annie, how are you feeling about probably no justice for Joe? I've hoped till now, but don't see Lori and Chad being prosecuted for Joe's murder too. I've always kind of said that I suspect that this will be something, it won't be, if there's justice, it won't be anytime soon. I think it's going to be most likely, like probably after I'm gone, it'll be like, like probably the result of, someone with a deathbed confession or something like that. So because there are so many people keeping these secrets, and inevitably it's going to tumble out. So yeah, I mean, for the most part, I've had to move on. Like, I've had to focus on my business. I've been building apps. I've been, really, especially since I finished school, I just really have had to redouble my efforts, back toward my business. But yeah, so it's just, it's not something, it's not something I am, I don't know, going to give up my peace for. If it happens, great. But, at the same time, when I started fighting for justice for Joe, in the early stages, it looked bleak, especially after Colby made that allegation on Dateline. Like, it just looked like I'm never going to get justice for him now. Now he's just being, trampled again, but this time post-mortem. And, but I've seen that come full circle. Like, I think at this point, everyone knows she murdered Joe. Yeah, I think the only ones who are even holding out that she didn't are members of the Cox family and their sock puppets. Like, I just don't think that there's anyone else. I think you have to have a horse in this race to hold on to the delusion, even when we've already started seeing fissures in some of these, secrets, with, and not even just the secrets. Like, so, allegedly, someone had told, who was it? Audrey told a friend of hers that Lori was there when Joe died. But then, Ann Eliason, one of Lori's friends in Hawaii, said that Lori told two different friends that she paid Alex to murder Joe. So it's not even like it's hidden at this point. At this point, it's just, Phoenix police just being like, we really don't care. Like, we just don't want to bring, this heap of coals into our lap. But I've watched enough true crime to see sometimes all it takes is someone, younger, more passionate, more tech savvy. Because a lot of these detectives, like, they are just not tech savvy. I saw that even in just going through the FOIA docs. So, and you know, a lot of them, they're just like, they're not really educated beyond like a high school education, at least the ones who, well, you know, a lot of them who are working on these cases, you know, FBI withstanding. But yeah, so, you know, there could just be someone who comes in who's educated, who's tech savvy, and who just has like a fire in his or her belly and just says, I'm opening up this file. Like, we are opening an investigation into this case. So, you know, who knows? But I at least, you know, I just feel like I'm doing my best to, you know, bring more visibility to that. Okay. Moonlight View asked, how can Lori continue to be Miss Upbeat, perky inmate ever known to mankind? Yeah, so I talked about this before, but I think it's just a show. I think it's a dog and pony show. I don't think that she's really that upbeat. You know, in some ways, yes. I think she has pretty well garrisoned herself from, you know, any realization of what she's actually done. Like, I know one YouTuber claimed that they had like an inside source that said, who said Lori still believes Chad's teaching. And you know, I don't mean to, you know, denigrate anyone's work, but it's a raging statement of the obvious. Of course she still supports and believes his teachings, and, you know, may even try to spread them. But there's no way that she would be able to accept that these teachings are off without significant risk of a psychotic break. So, and I just don't think jails and prisons have the resources to be able to safely, you know, like, guide someone through that deprogramming process. And so I think that these beliefs and really digging in her heels just help her avoid, you know, like, just a psychotic break or just, you know, deep depression. Because if she ever at any point, you know, really did any kind of, you know, self-scrutiny, self-analysis, and even considered that maybe she was deceived, how would she would have to process, well, that means none of these people had to be killed, you know. So but having said that, you know, I've said this before, I suspect the, you know, just the protracted periods of time that she has been largely isolated from people has been very hard on her. And I think also she wants to minimize the, you know, like, people making fun of her. She doesn't want to look defeated. So I think that's why she comes in, you know, sashaying into court and smiling. I think it's her way of trying to send this message, like, this doesn't bother me at all. But yeah, I just know from that conversation we had about, you know, when she was telling me about how she was always a good girl and she never got into trouble in school, and you know, that I just don't think you go from that to just not caring that you're one of the most hated people in your country, quite possibly the world, and especially the most hated mom. But yeah, so yeah, I just don't just don't buy it. I do think that she will be in her element somewhat when the trial starts, because she's going to play an active role in her defense. So I think it was more embarrassing for her, especially to be so small, sitting between these big, these two big dudes. I imagine that really bothered her. But now she's going to be out front, and I think she's going to enjoy some of the power. I mean, even just seeing Summer and Janice, in court, it was like the first hearing where she was representing herself, and there they were. They didn't come to her trial. They didn't come to anything else, but then here they were. So, message received. She knew that she wields a lot of power right now. She has to know that there are people who are very afraid of being questioned by her, because she knows she knows the text messages, she knows the emails, and and even with regard to Charles, if he was involved in anything sketchy, that's all going to be dragged out into the light. Plus, with the discovery, he would also have access to Charles' text messages and emails with other family members who will most likely be called as witnesses, either by the state or, most likely, mostly by the state. I don't think she would call any of these people as hostile witnesses, but anyone the state calls, obviously she's going to get to cross-examine. So I've seen some comments where some people are like, I look forward to it. I'm like, I don't believe it. I think it's a lot of saber rattling. We'll see. But will you still be on YouTube with Q&As? Yeah, I'm basically biding our time until the trial. I don't know that I'll really follow Brandon's trial very closely, but if there's anything that's particularly interesting, I'll jump on. But I'm really mostly biding my time until the FOIA docs come out. And I have noticed that Idaho has been in no hurry to release the FOIA docs. So I think that was a favor to Arizona. I think they're just going to wait until after these two trials. But yeah, we'll keep doing it. I mean, I enjoy at least getting to hang out with the community, but yeah, I do think that this upcoming trial is going to be very interesting. So I will be trying to follow it as closely as I can, but yeah, but I'm really gunning for those FOIA docs, because I think people's most honest versions of themselves are in what they said and what they texted and what they emailed before this became a big case. Okay, Miss Weed Lassie said, I think it shows Phoenix as a lazy department. Oh, 100%. I feel there was enough evidence left in his apartment for them to have stumbled on clues. Yeah, so, I'll always be so grateful to Garna Mejia, who is a reporter who passed on the pictures from the welfare check the day that they found Joe. And I think it was the first live. No, it wasn't the first live I did. It was the first live I did after starting Cool Cats. It wasn't the first live I did here. It was a live I did on Analytics. But And I didn't even jump into all the pictures because some of them, they were pretty disturbing. So some of the pictures I just kept in Cool Cats because it's at least like a private group. And I think people knew if they shared those publicly, I'd be all over that. But yeah, so there were so many details, like a pair of women's sunglasses on the bathroom counter that look like the typical sunglasses that Lori wears. He had activated a box of hair dye, but in the ME's report, it said, or the autopsy, it said that his hair was brown and gray and his beard was gray. So clearly it was activated, but he never used it, which meant like he activated this, this bottle of hair dye, and then it appears he got sick and had to go lie down or something. Something happened. But yeah, there were a lot of weird details, like, even, yeah, anyway, lots and lots of weird details. So, it's not like it would be the first case one on circumstantial evidence, but yeah. Annie, do you think Lori is a psychopath? So apparently the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath is one is born and one is made. So by environmental influences or trauma, things like that. So I don't know if Lori was born this way. It doesn't sound like she was. Even talking with a woman who was good friends with her through a lot of their childhood, she was a normal kid. And she actually, I told her the story that Lori had told me about her, how she was a good girl and she never got in trouble. And I had like the school record for the most detentions in 1 year, so we were talking about like just how different our childhoods were. And so, but this friend or former friend confirmed to me that it was true. Lori didn't get in trouble and she got along with other kids and teachers. So I suspect she's most likely a sociopath, but we don't really know because she wasn't evaluated as far as we know as a kid. So, and it was also interesting that in her first two marriages, she was like into petty crimes. Like there were two different incidences of her, and I think it was her first, or I think maybe her second husband. I don't know. One of her husbands before Joe. She had two different incidences of like check fraud, but one noted that it was like under $50. So, so it sounds like earlier on she was kind of more of like a petty criminal, and then she switched up her MO and started targeting older, wealthier men. But okay. But she's something. She does not have natural empathy. The only evidence I've seen of her like really truly caring for people up to this point has been with Chad and with Colby. And Colby, I don't know, that's a question mark now, because I think in Lori's mind, the unpardonable sin is humiliating her. And one thing I knew about Lori is that she was very private. So she was really careful, like on social media and stuff, really didn't like social media. She was a pretty private person. And so but I think, being rejected like that publicly, and that I think that was really hard for her. But for everyone else, like, and even with Colby and even with Chad, she was still using them. Like, she was totally taking advantage of Colby and Kelsey's, money issues to buy their silence. I mean, that's not love, you're still using even your son. But I did consistently see a pattern of her, like, really expressing adoration toward Colby, even as an adult. She was very soft toward him. The friction was mostly between her and Kelsey. Tylee, also Kelsey. But yeah, but if push came to shove, I think she would push anyone under the bus. Okay, Beach Monkey asks, well, what do you think about Lori trying to bail on Brandon's attempted murder? I mean, I think she's just doing her job. Like, now it's her job to defend herself. Oh, that does remind me. I do think that to some degree, on par with her adoration of Colby is also her adoration of Melanie. But I think in Lori's mind, there's probably a chance that Melanie has kind of replaced Colby, because in Lori's very myopic thinking, Melanie has remained loyal, whereas Colby didn't. So, yeah. So, I started to read her filing about, not getting a speedy trial. So, but also getting the date wrong, which it did make me wonder, like, is no one reviewing these filings? Like, and does she not have access to a computer? Like, I think it's kind of unusual that, I don't know, just that she has to handwrite these. But yeah, I think she's going to try to get out of anything that she can. And all is fair in love and war, in her mind. So, so I don't hold it against her that, she's trying to play the law as much as she can. I don't think she's going to be effective, but it doesn't, like, get me riled up. I think with this case, I learned pretty early on that I had to stay somewhat distanced from it, because you could just go from, just follow this roller coaster of, because of all the outrageous things that have happened in the case. Do you think she actually realizes how hated she is among the masses? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do. I think there are people who, like, try to push that, like, she's so far deluded, she doesn't know, or she really still thinks that she's going to lead the 144,000. I'm a little one against the wind on this, but I don't think she ever really believed that. Like, I think she did what she needed to do to get Chad on the hook. I do think that she was naive and just outright dumb enough to think that they could get away with these murders. But that's a little bit different, because I think that she has gotten away with murder. So I think she had some plausible deniability on that one. I don't think she really had to be deluded when she's gotten away with murder. And I suspect that even before Joe, like even just with that whole thing of, like her previous attorney supposedly coming to her, in a dream after he died and gave her a message to tell his ex-wife that he still loved her. And keep in mind, she wasn't telling like a confidant. She told a therapist who was judging her. Like she was in the midst of a custody battle and was meeting with a therapist and told this therapist this detail. So in that regard, I think there are some delusions, but I think for the most part, she really thought that she could continue to get away with murder. And even when she and Melanie Gibb and Tylee met with Gilbert police, she had them eating out of her hand. So there were no indicators that she might not continue to get away with murder. So, so I don't think that she's deluded enough to think that people actually like her. I think, I strongly suspect when the camera isn't on her, she's very miserable. And one, who wouldn't be? But unlike Lori, like Lori is like a super extrovert. So, and she's an outgoing extrovert, kind of more the classic extrovert. I'm slightly more extroverted than introverted, according to Myers-Briggs, but I'm a shy extrovert. So it takes a lot to get to know people. And then once I feel comfortable, I'm obviously not shy, but she's not even shy. Like she's private, but she is an outgoing extrovert. So I just think, even being like a shy extrovert, like having the level of exclusion and isolation that she has had for now close to 5 years. Like when she was in Idaho, she was no longer, she wasn't completely isolated even in Rexburg, but she was largely isolated. And then when she actually went to big girls prison, then she wasn't so isolated. But according to one prisoner, she was with the quote unquote crazies. So it sounds like she still wasn't in Gen Pop. But I think Lori really needs to be around people. She has to have that for like endorphins and stuff. So so I suspect she is really miserable. Plus, she's a lovesick puppy. She only had a few weeks of being married to this man who I think she loves as much as she could love anyone. And then it was life on the run. And I'm sure there was friction when they were on the run together, because that's just the nature of the beast. But they had so little time together as a married couple. And now, she has to know, like, she's 50. She could live another 30 plus years. Like I can't, even when I try to put myself in her shoes and imagine myself living 30 years in prison. Like I had a family member, no, it was a foster family member who was in prison for a long time. And I visited him, I think once. But it's just so depressing. I lived pretty far away, but I saw him twice while he was in prison. But they're just such like it's just such a depressing environment. Obviously, it's meant to be punitive. It's not meant to be fun. But yeah, so I think life for her is pretty hard, as it should be. Okay. Jules, hey Jules, asked, do you think Alex and Lori were responsible for Joe? And when she gets convicted for Charles, it will show a pattern and Joe may finally get justice. So yes, I definitely think that they were in on Joe's murder together. I think she'll be very careful to avoid any references to Joe because, that's kind of quicksand. But she may end up inadvertently, playing some piece of evidence that then doesn't get redacted in the FOIA docs. And I've seen now how, something like a single word could completely change the context of a sentence. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen those memes. They were more popular a few years ago, but it would be like, ruin a song title with a letter or something, and they're really funny, but yeah, I think in some ways it's been kind of like that with, some of the things that I found in the FOIA docs. Like, well, one time I was just reading the boilerplate, and by boilerplate, I'm talking about like the fine print at the bottom of like a search warrant. And there was a detail that I was like, wait a minute. Someone who was interviewed December 5th, that was Ian Pulowski, and but it just said in the context of the search warrant that someone who was interviewed on December 5th and was close to to a family member or something like that had said that the kids were dead. And so, I was, but the boilerplate with these search warrants is pretty significant, and then there was that video of Charles saying, and she said, I'm going to kill you too, and it was just like, wait a minute, too. Ostensibly, he was the first one she had threatened. So who is this two? Who else did she kill? And how much did Charles know about that? So I think it's going to be a tiptoe through the tulips to, play some of this evidence without accidentally disclosing a detail that, ties into some screenshot that I already have. Because there are lots of things that I've just like tucked away. And I'm like, okay, this is a question mark. This is a weird detail. But it doesn't seem to really fit with anything else. And, but then all it takes is some other little weird detail to come out, like in the FOIA docs or in the trial. And then, suddenly you're like, oh, wait a minute, these two go together. So it's kind of like a game of memory. So, given her lack of intelligence and her lack of acumen, like she just doesn't have academic training. She's very cunning, but she's not intelligent. And, she has that very kind of juvenile reasoning ability. And you see it even in like her latest filing, like she can't really argue the law. So, she just kind of like makes kind of a common sense appeal, like almost like pound, if you have the law on your side, pound the law. If you have the facts on your side, pound the facts. If you have neither the law nor the facts on your side, pound the table. Like she's going to resort to some table pounding. But yeah, I don't know. But I do think she is going to be careful with regard to details about Joe. Okay, Beverly asked, regarding the eventual FOIA data drop, What are some of the general matters about which you're most keen to learn / and discover more? So I talked about a little bit about this in the last live, and I'll probably do a live right before the trial. I did before, I think, Lori's trial, and maybe before Chad's, of like the questions that I hope to get answers to. And a lot of them are still the same, like, you know, what made Kay and Jess say that they knew the kids were missing in October. You know, like, how do you define missing? So I'm very, very curious about that. I'm also very curious as to when Kay first accessed Charles' Amazon account. So I do know, going through the very first FOIA document dump, Detective Moffat had emailed Kay and asked for her IP address, and she sent her IP address. And this was 2019, so this was before rolling IP addresses. Like, even when they referenced Lori, or the IP address that created the KK Walker account, like, they identified it as being in Katy, Texas, which is the actual neighborhood, or I don't know, suburb that Charles' home was in. It was in like Houston, the you know, the surrounding Houston area, but specifically it was Katy, and the IP address confirmed that this account was created in Katy. Now, today, you really can't rely on IP addresses. I mean, law enforcement, if they have a search warrant, they have actual device IDs. So, you know, like when someone is like trolling and they're using sock puppets and stuff, you know, like that. Like, if police get a warrant for their search records, or they do a dump of their phone, they could actually parse through. Like, there are apps that they can use that will actually list like the total number of Facebook accounts and Reddit accounts and things like that, if you know, if they were so inclined to look into that. And it's because it's tethered to their device ID. So it's like each device kind of has, you know, like a social security number, if you will. So, you know, but at that time, IP addresses were much more reliable. And I've always been curious as to what they were looking for. You know, like, I suspect at that point, someone had accessed one or more of Charles' accounts after he was dead, and there have been some contradictions as to when Kay actually first accessed the account. But yeah, I'm curious as to that, not just for morbid curiosity, but more for like the timeline. That's as much as I'll say. Also, yeah, there are lots of other details that I still, you know, I'm very curious as to, you know, just how much money these different family members were getting. I'm curious as to why Detective Moffat was so insistent that Kay not trust Adam. And, you know, he referenced that Adam may have called Lori after talking to Charles. And I've said this before. It's not like he wouldn't have called her. Well, he, meaning Detective Moffat, wouldn't have called Kay 3 times in one evening if he wasn't sure. I think what he was saying was that we know that a call was made from Adam's phone number to Lori's phone number, and it lasted for this long. But it was enough to cause him, you know, a significant amount of concern. And and for him to tell Kay, I don't think he's trustworthy. So, I'm curious, again, not that I don't, it's not like I look forward to people's lives being upended one more time. I'm sure it has to be really exhausting for these friends and family members to just be like, oh my gosh, not another trial that we have to worry if we're going to be subpoenaed. But these are things that I'm curious about. So I know that there are definitely more, but yeah, those are the ones that come to mind. Okay, someone asked, how do you think Kay Woodcock will react to Lori's cross-examination? I think that's going to be the clash of the titans. I think Kay's going to have a difficult time, and Lori's going to be pushing her buttons. Yeah, I know on this issue, I'm definitely one against the wind for the most part, but there are details, as much, and I always try to set as a foundation. Charles was a victim. He did not deserve anything that happened to him, regardless of the friction in his relationship with Joe, regardless of what he may or may not have known about Joe's death. He didn't deserve what happened to him. But there are details that have, kind of poked out through the FOIA docs that are uncomfortable with regard to Charles. And I think some women, especially, are a little quick to just explain everything away when we don't have the information. We have very little information, but what we do know is that he the last site he browsed before he was murdered was a life insurance site. And Janice and I had talked about this at length. I wasn't going to put this out there. I think I mentioned it in passing in a live, but it was pretty verboten, so I was really careful with it. But it wasn't until Lori's trial that we learned, okay, that was the company that Lori had a life insurance policy with, and so, and then we know that he had $2,000 cash in his suitcase that was found in in his hotel room. And and I think people are just a little too quick to explain it away, oh, he was probably just going to use that to put down as a deposit for an apartment. Well, that's not something you would ever do, because when you're putting a deposit down on an apartment, you obviously want there to be evidence that you paid that deposit. But anyway, so there is the chance that more of those details could come out, because I do wonder if Lori's strategy will be to try to provide evidence. All she has to do is cause enough reasonable doubt in one juror's mind. And, one of the ways that she may decide to do that is to really harp on Charles' threats. And he did have some, concerning threats, even, me looking over your shoulder. You don't know when it's coming, but it's coming when you least expect it. And, and so I don't say this in judgment, he was he was operating out of his lizard brain probably for months. That's a very protracted period of time. It was, the tensions were so high. And if he was afraid that he could lose his life, he was right. Same with Tylee. I said that early on when people were like, she didn't even try to get justice for Charles. I was like, yeah, well, you know what? If she was afraid that she could lose her life in this or that she was next, she was right. And her only job was to try to stay alive with no help from any other adults. So, but that being said, I think there could be, more uncomfortable details that come out. So, we'll see. At the same time, she and Chad were incredibly unsavvy criminals, and especially at the time that Charles was murdered. Like later on, they started becoming a lot more savvy, but not up to the point of Charles' murder. Like a little bit, but she was putting a ton in writing, and then obviously so was Chad with his silly trust ratings and light ratings and all of these things. So, but yeah, I think there are going to be a few witnesses that it could get pretty combustible. I think Melanie Gibb, because Melanie Gibb, she bristled so much at John Pryor, and Lori's going to be able to push so many more of her buttons, because, unlike John Pryor, she's just infinitely more aware of the details of just how involved Melanie Gibb was. Same with Audrey. If Audrey is called as a witness, and I don't know that she will be, it might be that the state is, kind of, I don't know, that, I don't know, takes pity on some of these witnesses and doesn't call them because of the potential for Lori, just really grilling them. But yeah, it's yeah, I don't know. It's so hard to predict. Plus, we've never seen Lori try to maintain decorum. Like even in her trial, if she was angry, like it showed all over her face that she was like a child, pouting and crossing her arms. So she didn't even have the ability to restrain her behavior enough to maintain a poker face. And these things, for me, having known Lori as much or as little as I did, they were very insightful, because I watched her and I was like, no, she's still so led by emotion. And she was led by emotion through all of these crimes. It was like her biggest vulnerability, because you can't think straight when you're that filled with like rage. And so yeah, so it could really get kind of wild. But will Charles' sons attend the trial? I don't know. Yeah, that could go either way. On the one hand, I hope that they don't. Talking about Cole and Zach, like I just can't say enough good things about them. And they were like two of the very few people throughout the entirety of this case who have just really impressed me. And we got to spend some time together at Lori's trial, and they were as impressive as young adults as they were when they were kids. And so I kind of hope for their sakes they don't take in too much of this. But at the same time, if they are there, I can understand why they would want to be there. But just seeing how they've kind of eschewed the spotlight as much as possible. They might come for like the beginning. I just don't know. I just don't know. It's hard to predict, but yeah, I mean, I could see it going either way, but do you think Charles' sons will be able to sue for wrongful death? Who would they be able to sue? Law enforcement, the Coxes? I do think if anyone has a wrongful death lawsuit, it's Charles' sons. Because law enforcement could have prevented these deaths, and specifically their father's death. I don't know that I see them pursuing that, but I think that they would have grounds. I don't think that the Woodcocks would, just because they withheld so much evidence that they had. But I think Cole and Zach, they always, they responded, as did their mom, Cheryl. I've mentioned this before, but she is the only one I have seen evidence of holding law enforcement's feet to the flames, as far as Arizona law enforcement. Just really pushing back on how little they were doing in investigating Charles' death. And she was his ex-wife. I don't say that like in any kind of like disrespectful way. I'm just saying, like, here she was, the ex-wife, and she was the one. She even said, "You looked my son in the eyes and said you would be helpful." So, I mean, when I was reading through the FOIA docs, I was like, you go, girl. Because everyone else was like, thank you, you're doing such a great job. Of course, they were also withholding evidence. And, so there were a lot of weird flexes going on in all directions. But with Cheryl, Cole, and Zach, I've just seen nothing but sincerity. So, yeah, I kind of doubt they will, but I'd love to see them do it. Okay. Didn't Tylee say, "Not me, Mom," regarding her being a zombie? She had to be terrified. Yes, so this was an interesting detail. So early on, there was a detail in the original affidavit of probable cause that came out of Idaho, and it mentioned this detail of that Lori had referred to Tylee as being a zombie while on the phone with Melanie Gibb, and Tylee responded, "Not me, Mom." But then that detail was later removed from the affidavit of probable cause. We also saw, so there was a little bit of a storyline here, reading between the lines, if you will. So the affidavit of probable cause came out and it had that detail. Well, initially the affidavit of probable cause wasn't, well, what was it? It was like, it was being withheld because someone was afraid for their life. So there was like a delay in it coming out. And I think everyone was like, well, I think for people who didn't buy the Melanie Gibb, was just naive line of reasoning, I think it was pretty clear that it was Melanie who felt like, her life was in danger. Well, that didn't really hold water. And so they ended up later releasing the affidavit of probable cause. So initially, that detail was included in the affidavit of probable cause, but then later it was removed. So if you look at the affidavit of probable cause now, it doesn't have that detail, but originally it did. So I think Melanie was kind of like, sticking her finger to the wind and just like, oh, this doesn't make me look good. Can you please take that out of the affidavit of probable cause? And it appears Rexburg police was willing to accommodate that. So that was just a strange little detail. But yes, it's not just folklore. It's not a claim. It was in the original affidavit of probable cause, with the detail of that occurring in the spring. So Tylee wasn't murdered until September. So we're talking from spring to September. Tylee knew that she had been identified as a zombie, but also the entire Cox family, at least all of the ones who were in, I thought it would just be like kind of the more immediate players, the Cox family as well as the Vallow family received, when Charles had sent that email where Chad had raided Lori's family members, and that was the email where Tylee was rated a dangerously dark spirit. So I'm sure, I am quite sure Tylee knew. Tylee had also come into, she had also gotten a hold of that email. We don't have evidence of that, but, I just can't imagine that this entire family had received this email and no one would have told Tylee about it. And we know that Colby received the email in February because Charles actually intercepted that email before he and Lori had their big blow up fight. In fact, it may have contributed to the big blow up where, supposedly Charles was identified as a dark spirit. It was like January 30th or something. He had found that email the week before. So, yeah. So I suspect that Tylee knew very early on that she had been identified as a dangerously dark spirit. And, Lori, she doesn't have an internal editor. Like, if something comes across her mind, it tumbles out of her mouth. Like, she can't hold it in. Even a detail that you would think, like, she would hold close to the vest, like the fact that she paid Alex to kill Joe. You would think, like, that wouldn't be something that, while she's in Hawaii, which she went to Hawaii after Joe was found. So Joe was found, and what does Lori do? She takes off for Hawaii. She's hanging out with her friends and bragging to these friends in Hawaii that she paid Alex to murder Joe. So, she just really doesn't have a capacity for like keeping secrets. So, and also she is very much a power player. So I imagine that she was really enjoying the fact that now she had someone who was not only on her side, but actually quantifying her every grievance against family members and, friends and stuff. And, just all in on all of her drama. And so I suspect that she enjoyed the tectonic shift of the power differential, because I've talked about this before, but when I was out there, Tylee and Colby had all the power. Like, they ruled the roost, and Lori was much more of the peacemaker, and just kind of like going with the flow. Like, she kind of wanted to be the cool mom, the one who is, going on fun trips and taking our kids shopping and stuff like that. And now all of a sudden, no, she is the one in power and can control her kids. And I don't say that like as if like Colby and Tylee were acting inappropriately. It was just, you hang around a family, you see their family dynamics, like how they operate as a family. And I had always seen that in all of the trips that I had with them. So it was a consistent pattern that Lori was the accommodator, she was the peacemaker, she was the one who was like, up and peppy and positive and all of those things. So to now have even her own kids either looking to her in, kind of a slavish kind of way, like where, Colby was very dependent on her, and Tylee wasn't dependent on her for money, but she clearly was afraid for her life. And I thought the detail that Lori said of like, that Tylee was being sweet and cleaned her room, and Chad, confirmed that that was evidence that she had been overtaken by an evil spirit. And I'm like, yeah, that's, from what I know about or could surmise about evil spirits, I don't think that they make people, teenagers, clean their room and be sweet, and so, that detail hit me pretty hard, because it just kind of confirmed what I intuitively thought, which was that Tylee knew that she was in danger and that no one was looking out for her, and it was up to her to try to make peace with this person who had become a monster, and at least like stay alive long enough to where she could get out of there. But okay. Do you think Melanie's phone call admitting she knew the kids were gone will make it into this trial? Yeah, it really wasn't used very much in the other trials. So, yeah, I kind of doubt it, because they're going to need to really focus on Charles' murder, and that call really had to do more with the kids. So, yeah, I could be surprised. I mean, they certainly played a lot of details in Chad and Lori's trials that I was surprised, just because it got really, really complicated and kind of torturous, like in all like the twists and turns and all the financial details and stuff. So I think they're, I think they're going to have to be kind of careful to stay laser focused on Charles' murder. But yeah, so I could be surprised, but yeah, I think even with Melanie Gibb, they'll focus more on, anything she might have heard, excuse me, when she was there July 9th. And she had been spending the night with Lori quite a bit. Someone who was close to Melanie Gibb and who has been a very reliable source, told me that at when Melanie separated from her husband, that she was spending quite a few nights with Lori, because she wasn't at the house. She continued to like rent a room, I think, from the house. So it was a weird situation, but there were a lot of nights where Melanie was gone, and so yeah, I suspect she was there quite a bit, but okay. What kind of flexing are you referring to, Annie, surrounding the data procured and the players involved? I forget I'm not really sure what the reference is. Remember using that word. I don't know. I don't remember what it was in reference to. So Moonlight View, maybe if you could provide a little more detail or context, or if someone else remembers the context. I don't. If you're talking about the saber rattling, and I know that there have been family members who are like, I'm looking forward to it. And I think Larry's response initially was probably the most sincere and the most telling. It was, he sounded just distraught. He said something like, if it weren't for, his Lord and Savior Jesus, like it was like something like they wouldn't make it through the day or something like that. It was he's a pretty dramatic guy, but it was a pretty, like heartfelt expression of just what I can only imagine is just like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, this, like I said, this has to be exhausting. Now, these, some of these family members, they're going to get through these next two trials just in time for, for the next wave of, appellate cases, the appeals process. So some of these family members, like they could be spending the next who knows how many years testifying over and over and over. So if it's in reference to that, I think that was most likely the more sincere response. Like, I think for people who have made contradictory statements, who have made statements where the Foya evidence or the evidence from these police reports contradicted some of their claims, the timelines haven't lined up, some of the claims just haven't made sense. Like, we knew the kids were missing in October. That makes no sense to me. And then Rich Robertson, the private investigator, said initially they knew the kids were missing, but no one was all that concerned at that point, and it's like, how can those two things be like, that makes no sense to me. How can you know that kids are missing, but you're not that concerned? And even there was a little detail that came out in the trial. I think it was in the trial. It might have been in the one of the police reports, but it was a minor detail, but it was in October when Rexburg Police was first involved, because they wanted Rexburg Police to track down the Jeep and surveil Melanie, and now, well, Lieutenant Hermosillo, he was Detective Hermosillo at the time, had made reference to, I think he had a conversation with, maybe it was Detective Pillar from Gilbert Police. It was with someone, and they just said to that they were holding off. Like, I think Detective Hermosillo had asked if there was anything that Gilbert Police needed him to do regarding JJ, and there was some kind of exchange about, like, hold off for now, because I think Kay is still, like, asking around, like, family and friends, something like that, as if, like, some family member or friend had JJ. And so it was like, well, let's just hold off for now. And she's going to ask around. But, again, for someone who didn't know, like, the details of, JJ's autism and his ADHD, he was an extremely energetic little boy and very high needs. He required nearly constant care, except for, like, when he was watching TV. And so, like, anyone who knew that about him would have known that you are going to get a friend to take JJ for an extended period of time, But so even with that, it's just, there have been, like, these little details where it's like, I just don't understand the hesitation. And some people have said, oh, like, Kay and Larry, and I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just saying, like, there are details that they just don't make sense. And so some people have said, well, Kay couldn't have possibly thought and that JJ's life would have actually been in danger. But, and I've shared this before, but I just have a folder of all of the emails that she had sent very early on. I think as early as August, where she was telling Detective Moffat that she was very afraid for JJ's life, and that Lori wanted to get rid of him too. And, she was saying, like, we can't lose him too. So she knew that the risk was there. And again, I don't want to be cruel or anything like that, but, so I just think, like, with this trial, more of these details could come out. So it just doesn't really track for someone who, has kind of all these, like, different contradictions or things that don't make sense or whatever, that they would be like, yeah, bring it on, maybe. But I don't, I think these are going to be very difficult trials for anyone who has really anything to hide, because they really don't know what Lori could bring out. So, okay. Moonlight View, again, concerning issues being left out of discovery and possibly familial interference. Yeah, I don't know. I know that Lori was complaining about something, and I did take note of the fact that that the state said, listen, we've given you 1,200 pages of discovery. So that encouraged me. I do hope that means that a lot more will be coming out through the FOIA docs. But yeah, so, as far as details being left out of discovery, I guess Lori would know if something has been left out, because she was actually party to these crimes. And but yeah, but I don't think that there will be familial interference per se. I just think that there's the chance that some of these cross examinations could get pretty heated, because we saw it even with John Pryor, understandably so. I mean, some of the witnesses, even before he started talking, they were just like double guns Pryor. You know, I am not even being like civil. But so I suspect we'll probably see some of that with Lori. But you know, but the thing that makes Lori different from John Pryor is, one, she has more knowledge of all of these different people's involvement. She also has email and text exchanges that Charles had with other people. And even when I was like reading through the FOIA documents from Lori and Joe's divorce, and even much more so the document that the one person gave me of like their notes from the time that they were involved in like the investigation and the protracted custody battle. Like there were times I was reading these notes and saw that both Lori and Joe lied. And, you know, Joe, I can give a little bit more room because he was fighting for custody. But for some of the details, I'm like, well, I was actually there for this. So I saw where both of them were lying. And I thought, this is so interesting because they never thought, like, oh, maybe there will be a day where the person we are lying about will actually have these notes and will just be like, you know, it's just kind of disappointing. But I mean, you know, we're all human. But I think similarly, some of the things that Charles may have said to family members, we just don't know. Like, we don't know how careful he was or wasn't. And so, yeah, so it has to be somewhat surreal for Lori to just have all of this evidence, all of this discovery. But yeah, but yeah, I don't really foresee like familial interference. I do think that Summer and Janice coming to that hearing was them kissing the ring in hopes that if they are called as witnesses, that Lori will have mercy on them, because Lori could destroy both of them. I mean, just with the information that we have and some of the questions about, like, well, was Summer the mystery woman in the Ring doorbell, you know, camera footage or whatever, you know, these details could absolutely destroy Summer and Janice. So yeah, so I think similarly, anyone with anything to hide has to know that even if Lori loses this case, and I do strongly suspect that she will, I just think her primary objective is to take as many people down with her as she can. Oh, this is a good question. Do you think Jason had involvement with Charles' death? So I actually don't. I think he was involved early on when he was kind of smitten with Lori, and you know, in that situation where Charles took Lori's purse, and I'm not making any excuses for Jason. I really tried to look at these details as just as methodically and uninvolved as possible. So trying to put myself in Jason Mal's shoes, first of all, he's a total weirdo. I mean, he has the intelligence of maybe a middle schooler. And I am not even saying that to, you know, try to disparage him. You see it in his writing. I mean, Lori is a better writer than than Jason Mao by far. And so, I mean, he has to completely rely on blustering and saber rattling and, just, denigrating people. And anyway, so just not an intelligent guy. But putting myself in his shoes early on, I think by Charles taking Lori's purse, he gave he gave Jason like a little bit of plausible deniability that he may have seen Charles as I don't know, a toxic player at minimum and potentially dangerous at worst. And so, yeah, so I think he was very caught up in the whole drama of them going to Gilbert Police. I think that he met up with Melanie Gibb and gave her advice to give to Lori. I think he was like all up in this like chick drama and the excitement of it all. So very much a like a chick kind of response. Whereas, a lot of dudes, especially dudes who are kind of more, given to like toxic masculinity, they don't really get caught up in like girl drama like that, but he did. So I think he was still very smitten with Lori. But I think by the time Charles was killed, I still think that Jason was all in on it. And I think that he was living vicariously through Lori. But, but I think he had to resort to like those weird passive aggressive social media posts, like looking for a Jeep, know a guy. They were just really, really strange posts that extended as far as like the day that Lori's bail was denied. I think that was the last of his really weird posts. And then I think he saw like the true crime world dig into his world. And he was just like, whoa, I didn't want any of this. I was just enjoying the drama. But now, having said all that, I don't think that I don't see evidence at this point that he actively played a role in Charles' murder. Like he might because of his I don't know, underdeveloped reasoning skills. And I'm really not trying to like just be disrespectful. Like I'm really trying to be like as calculated and I don't know, analytical as possible. Because at this point, like I don't have any strong feelings one way or another about Jason Mao. I think just kind of like the Bishop guy. I just think that they were both cowards. Like I think there were a lot of people who were cowards who could have stopped this and just chose not to. But. Yeah, so at least Gabe Bonilla, he was intelligent. He used all his biggest words talking to whichever detective he talked to. I think that was Gilbert Police, but they were out of context. It was like, it just wants you to know there's no terroristic threat, and it's like, all right. You know what, relax. Like, no one's afraid she's going to blow a building up. We're concerned about people's lives, not terrorism, But that was just like a cheap shot at like, okay, I don't really want to admit that this situation is as dangerous as it is. So I'm just going to overstate like, oh, just so that I don't think she's a terrorist. That's basically what he was saying. But anyway, so yeah, I just think that all of these players, I think they all thought that they could, fly as close to the sun as they did and not get burned. And they were all burned in the process. Even people who I think really legitimately were living vicariously through Lori, but thought they had enough distance. It was like they all just kind of got swept up. And now, history will always know them as the ones who, they could have done more and then they didn't. But why did Lori want those extradition docs so bad? She sure got shot down. Yeah, I think she was just looking for some kind of justification that she should have never even been brought to Arizona. And, the word on the streets was that she didn't want to go to Arizona. I think she had it pretty good in Idaho. And so I think she's hoping that she could find something that would, get her sent back to Idaho. But yeah, that was a pretty cringeworthy moment where the judge was like, did you read the transcript from the grand jury? Well, there you have it. That was the probable cause for extraditing you to Arizona and bringing these charges against you. That's all you need to know. Like these extradition documents. I think this is where her ignorance of protocol and law and all of these things kind of work against her, and she'll probably have a few of these gaffes. But yeah, so even with the I don't know if she'll have any kind of leg to stand on with saying she didn't approve of her attorneys asking for an extension, because I think she would have had to say something then. I don't think, I could be wrong, but yeah, I don't really see the court saying, oh, you didn't. Oh, okay. Well then, yeah, then your right to a speedy trial has definitely been violated. Like at this point, she can say whatever she wants, but if that wasn't on record, yeah, I don't think that I don't see that really going anywhere. So at this point, I think she's just throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping that something sticks. But I couldn't even get through that entire filing she submitted because I was just like, this just doesn't make sense. I don't have time for this. Okay, Iris asked, and I'll make this my last question. Help us remember, was Tylee's phone ever recovered, and has details been presented? Yes, it was recovered. I think when they arrested Lori in Hawaii, I think that was when they recovered Tylee's phone. So yeah, they didn't use it a whole lot. Again, this is kind of an unusual case in that, to some degree, the state's hands are somewhat tied because you have family members and victims, people who are like, there's no question, they are victims of this tragedy. And yet they also played, a negative role. We'll just say that. But they had different levels of complicity, either through acts of omission or commission. Either just not passing on evidence, not advocating for Tylee to actually lying about her and apparently trying to turn law enforcement against her so that they wouldn't see her in a sympathetic light. I think there was some retaliation going on there, but yeah, so I think it probably had to be a little unusual for the state to just be like, we want to play some of this evidence. Like, they never submitted that email of where Chad sent Lori the document with the ratings of her family members. They never played that. They didn't put that into play or even submit it as evidence in either of the trials. And I thought that was significant, especially in Lori's trial, and I don't say this by way of criticism. I understand why they didn't, because then they were potentially opening up these family members to be, grilled on cross-examination. Like, well, did you receive this email? Did you see these dangerous ratings? Not even just of Tylee, also of Brandon Boudreaux. So they weren't going to go and murder everyone who had who had been deemed a dark spirit, but anyone who they would benefit in some way by their murder, they definitely were at risk, and so I was very surprised that they didn't play that piece of evidence, nor did they admit any of the Amazon receipts, and both of those details, the fact that Chad sent Lori this email with these dark ratings within a few days of meeting her. This is October 2018. This definitely set the stage for clearly Lori was in on the murder of her daughter, because imagine, anyone who's a mother or just not a psychopath, anyone who loves someone who is in danger, like you, if let's say you're dating someone and within a few days of meeting this person is like, oh, by the way, one of your kids, dangerously dark spirit, dangerously dark, like only just a shade lighter than her father, who I've deemed was sealed. What was it? Sealed away or something like that. In other words, like not eligible for any more probations, made a deal with Satan, a covenant with Satan, and all of these things. Like, you would be like, you're out of your mind. Don't lose my number. Not Lori. She was all in. So clearly that did not bother her. Clearly she was okay with Tylee being murdered. And then we found out from the jurors that two of them really struggled over if Lori actually played a role or, even signed off on her daughter's murder. But they didn't, the jurors never knew that Lori knew within a few days of meeting Chad that he had rated Tylee a very dark spirit. Nor did they know about the Amazon receipts, because they also weren't sure that she played a role or even was okay with Tammy being murdered. Well, the Amazon receipts would have absolutely locked that down, because she was buying wedding rings and a wedding dress and, all of these wedding accoutrements, while his first wife while his wife, they weren't even separated, while his wife was still alive. So obviously she was okay with Tammy being murdered, but the jurors didn't know that. Thankfully, they did, in the end, decide that there was enough evidence that she probably was involved in the planning of these murders. But yeah, so but that also had to be really hard on the state to have this evidence that would make this case a slam dunk. And maybe they thought that there would be enough evidence that they wouldn't have to put these family members in any kind of jeopardy. But you know, it was like a little close. Not as close with Chad, because Chad was never going to get around the fact that the kids' remains were found on his property. But you know, so yeah, so I'm sure it has to be tricky with this case, because there's so many shades of gray. But okay, on that note, I'm going to call it a night. It was a pleasure, as always, to get to spend time with the community. If I didn't get to your question, I will lead the next Q&A with the questions I didn't get to. And have a great weekend. Good night.